Hello everyone, this is Saima, and today's video is about enmeshment. What is enmeshment? Two people are so involved and integrated with each other that we're not sure, or they themselves are not sure where one person begins and the other stops. There is a diffusion of boundaries. You'll see signs of enmeshment in the following ways. When you ask a question from one person and the other one answers, so that's a red flag that there is some enmeshment between the two. And the second one is when one person finishes the second person's sentences and vice versa. The third sign is when they refer to activities as a we. And they're always talking about the other person. When you talk to them about anything, the other person comes up a lot and they're referring to them a lot. These are all classic signs that there is some degree of enmeshment between one person and another person. So when there is enmeshment, there's going to be this kind of a circle where these two people are kind of inside each other, like they're not separated psychologically. They're sort of finding space in the other person. There is question, that we could all probably think about, and I'd be interested in knowing what you think. And the question is, do you think there is intimacy in enmeshment or not? Please post in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more about psychological perspectives in relationships and more holistic perspective on psychology, tools and tips, understanding relationships and dynamics there too, just go ahead and subscribe to this channel. And so, my question for you today, I'm going to repeat it, is do you think there's greater intimacy in relationships where there is enmeshment? And do you think that both of the parties enjoy the intimacy? If you think there's greater intimacy, by intimacy I mean is there more closeness when two people are enmeshed or not? What do you think? So here I'm going to share what I think. You know, enmeshment doesn't necessarily mean more closeness, but to people around them, enmeshment is going to mean that there is more closeness, there is more intimacy between the two, and people around them may actually sort of step back a little bit because it can be like a little bit of a non-inclusiveness within the enmeshed couple. To the rest of the world, it'll seem like the couple's so involved with each other, they're so happy with each other or so obsessively into each other, there's really not much space, for a third or fourth or fifth person to enter that. And so I'm going to show you that. So there isn't much space, right? They're kind of so involved with each other, they're so into each other, there isn't a lot of space for a third person to get to be part of that. So what happens then when there isn't enough of a space for other people and other activities is a level of anxiety develops in that closeness and in that enmeshment. And so, enmeshed relationships can be a very anxiety provoking because each person is looking to the other to solve their problems and to fix things for them and to be there for them and reassure them and help them manage their stresses and their problems. There is a level of high expectations, high demands in enmeshed relationships. So they can be suffocating for some people, and other people can thrive in the same level of enmeshment without any problems. So, what's that about? Okay, so enmeshment for you may not mean the same thing as enmeshment for another person. You may find yourself feeling really suffocated when somebody answers questions that are posed to you because you want the opportunity to express yourself. Another person may find the same situations overwhelming, so they may actually be relieved that their loving partner, to them it will appear like love, answered for them, sort of taking away the pressure on them to answer. So again, it's about their relationship with the other person being so, mentally safe, and there's so much exchange of energy and information between two people that the other person just knows what to do to make them happy. So yes, there can be a degree of intimacy in mesh relationships that may not be apparent in relationships where there's a little more breathing room. Now, for some people who have higher need for autonomy, that means that they are more integrated as personalities. They've grown more. A relationship that is so close and sort of may feel suffocating, literally suffocating. They may feel that there's not enough breathing room. There's just way too much watching, way too much responding, way too much attention, way too much, closeness. Whereas another person may thrive in just such a situation. And so, um, personally speaking, what do you think your need for space is like? Do you need lots of space because there's lots of subtlety and there's lots of nuance in how you interact with the world, and you'd like that space in order to express yourself, to be yourself, to feel like yourself? Or are you the kind of person who really wants to be held tight, and you would like someone to really understand your deep emotional needs, and to respond to them, to look at you in the eyes as you're speaking so that you can really bond with that person? Are you a person who naturally touches another person to feel that closeness, to emphasize that closeness? Or are you someone who likes to stand apart physically? So there's all sorts of interesting dimensions of enmeshment. So there's the physical sort of intimacy, whereas you'll see two people just cuddling up, sitting next to each other, touching each other. There is the emotional enmeshment, where one person literally feels everything that the other person is feeling and is there for them in that feeling sense. There is the mental enmeshment, where one person is always vigilant about what someone is saying and then going in there and saying whatever they have to say for that person, and just really listening to each word that that person says or does. Now, I'm sure some of you are just thinking to yourself, I know people like that. I feel like they are trying to enmesh with me, but I may not want to enmesh with them. And then they may see that as rejection, or there's sometimes I want to enmesh with them, and other times I don't. And so you may have all these questions about why you may sort of emotionally fatigue. You just feel too tired to really connect emotionally with someone. Individuals in a relationship, two individuals in a relationship, may have differing needs when it comes to the level of intimacy or closeness that they want. Now, for those of us who find enmeshment not intimate at all, that's usually because the person who's enmeshing is enmeshing at a vibrational level, or at a level of engagement that is not quite our core strength. So, for example, maybe they are wanting to connect with us physically. They may want to tap our shoulder, and we may just find that really annoying because we didn't get the information with the tap on the shoulder during that time. Or, for example, sometimes women can be very vigilant about what a man says, or a man may really listen closely to what a woman is saying. But usually I've noticed that women are maybe more vigilant, looking for clues about what the man means. And so they made to pay a lot of attention on what someone is saying, how they're saying it, what their nonverbal or body language was like when they were saying it. And those are all people who may actually enmesh emotionally more. They may be used to that or need that. They probably learned that way of relating as children. And then there's mental enmeshment, where you really can't say anything without the other person kind of editing it for you. You need to think this. So there can be this controlling and dominating style in enmeshment, and that again depends on the personality. So there's a huge spectrum of how we may enmesh. Now, not everyone enjoys enmeshment or the degrees of enmeshment. And for those who don't enjoy it, enmeshment can be traumatic. So, by traumatic, I mean so much to the point that the person may feel like they can't be themselves around that high degree of contact and that high degree of, they may even label it neediness. And you may have heard that word. I just found that person too needy. And so, enmeshment trauma can occur, especially for people who are highly sensitive. Their energy field is very sensitive. They may be able to feel somebody from like 5 feet away, and then for that person to stand very close to them or to be very sort of, into them all the time may feel traumatic to them. And sometimes it's because of enmeshment trauma that somebody can have some degree of fear around intimacy, is perhaps in their childhood they had a helicopter parent. I mean, a parent who was very controlling, very into the child, so much so that the child felt like they had to do everything that the parent expected them to do a certain way. So sometimes you're supposed to write like this, you're supposed to sit like this, you're supposed to eat like that, say this before you eat, do that before you eat this and don't eat that. So if there was a tremendous amount of that, like a more than average or at least higher than the child was comfortable with, in order for the child's need for growth and potential. And so there was this much of it, and the child only needed this much, for them to thrive. Then there was a mismatch. So there's a discomfort there. And that is going to carry into relationships for this person until they work on their issues and release some of the trauma around it. So, trauma occurs whenever a person learns very deeply and a very psychological and kinesiological way, like in their body, that they don't have choice, that they don't have control. And anytime that is conveyed to them, either through violence, either through words, either through shaming, judgment, and guilt tripping, any of those tools, satire is another one of them. Anytime a person learns that they are not safe in connection, there is enmeshment trauma. And if there is enmeshment trauma, then this person who has enmeshment trauma will find intimacy difficult. There'll be that fear of being completely overwhelmed and controlled. So this is where we got to, and we've got a few more minutes. And in that, I'm going to touch upon enmeshment in collectivism, meaning collectivist cultures. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the term collectivism, These are cultures where the the purpose is for the family or the culture to stay together, to fulfill a certain view of life. It could be that they are following a religion, a way of life, which is all about that. It's that rather than each individual and what their each individual's needs and desires are. So it's about this is the path. So collectivism, all forms of collectivism, and there are many countries that have that. From Japan has it, Pakistan, India, many Eastern countries have collectivistic cultures, and in those cultures, the idea is that there is a certain way. This is the way to be. So in Pakistan, it's like, oh, this is the Muslim way, this is the way everybody in the family has to act because this is the right path, this is your purpose, this is how you're supposed to be. So when there is a big shared belief like that, there is bound to be lots of enmeshment in a family, in the culture, in the society. The most important thing for people is going to be what other people may think of them. So, this particular kind of enmeshment is to make sure everybody else is pleased with them. So, you see how these little circles, they're all overlapping each other and they are all into each other. And it's very important for this person, what this person thinks of them and how this person acts towards them. And then it's really important how both of them act towards the third, and so on and so forth. So everyone's involved with everyone else. So in cultures like this, people like to hang together. They need to be in the same room, plenty of them, lots of them. They feel extremely alone and sad and lonely if it's just one or two people. They feel really weird because they're so used to being seen and heard by several people. So I'll give you a little example of that. So if you ever watched a Bollywood movie, you'll see that the hero heroine is in front and there's this whole group behind them. For me, that's like an analogy for how people feel in collectivistic cultures. There's them, there's that person, and then there's this background, this backdrop of other people who are very interested in this one person and what they do. So because there's such a huge impact of what one person does or says or thinks or acts like on all these other people who are looking on. So there's a tremendous sense of responsibility about your behavior, your choice of words, your choice of partner, choice of education on all the other people whom it's going to affect. So your decision is not just your decision. Your decision is really for the family's future. Really, that's what it boils down to. So everybody feels very responsible for their family and their future and the family's future, and the impact of their actions is huge on other people. So, and if you think about yourself only, you're considered very selfish because you're not thinking about your grandma, grandmother, grandfather, granduncle, sister-in-law, and all these other people. So you choose your words very carefully. You do everything very carefully because it affects everyone else. Now, there is enmeshment in collectivism. There is enmeshment trauma in collectivism if this kind of collectivist way, this psyche, this automatic thought that other people matter, what they think matters, is done with a lot of trauma. And if shaming has been used a lot, or violence has been used a lot to get each person to do as the family wishes or thinks is appropriate, there's bound to be trauma. And if there's trauma, weirdly enough, enmeshment can mean that people distance themselves emotionally, because whenever there's trauma, it's like a wall. There is a lack of trust, there is a lack of safety. I'm not safe with you. So collectivism ideally feels very safe with other people. People raised in that culture are very comfortable being around other people. But if there's been trauma, there's been significant trauma, then people from collectivist cultures may actually be very frightened, very anxious around others from their family. And that's when the anxiety stuff comes in. And there can be a tremendous amount of anxiety when there is enmeshment. Because again, each individual doesn't feel very safe. So, in later videos, I'm going to be talking about effective use of collectivism. So, collectivism is beautiful. It's kept, many beautiful cultures surviving and thriving. There is a tremendous sort of caretaking element in enmeshment. You're never alone. There's always someone there to help you. So there's some beautiful things about collectivism, but for collectivism to function effectively, it would be really helpful, wouldn't it be, to actually learn how the psyche works and what are some good ways to kind of encourage that positive connection and intimacy and warmth and love, and what are some negative ways. So, in a way, what I'm trying to say here is that enmeshment should not automatically be ruled out as this horrible thing that done to a child who could be so much more themselves and realize their potential if only the parents or the family didn't put so many expectations. I'd like us to move away from that lens, because in an individualistic culture, yes, that is the paradigm that psychologists may use. But in more culturally aware psychology, we don't need to use that one size fits all. We're all diverse human beings on the planet, and we can sort of see what is appropriate, or what is skillful, and then to let go of what is not so skillful. So for people raising children in more collectivist cultures, there are some effective ways. And again, positive, always positive reinforcement, clear communication, avoiding shaming. So, avoiding shaming the child to get them to do what you want would be really helpful. Putting in some limits, because people are not always going to do what you want. So you want to have some way of forgiving them and moving on, instead of enforcing a lot of control on people. So these are just some very basic rudimentary ideas around enmeshment in collectivism, that it's not necessarily always, counterproductive, but sometimes it can be counterproductive, and it is better to understand how to use enmeshment in a collectivist culture, especially if you care about continuing that culture from a psychological perspective, so that it is more effective. And also to remember that there are some individuals, and temperament is something that is inherited. So there are some temperaments that do not do well with enmeshment at all. They're not suited for that collectivism. Their personalities are just not. And we'll find people who, off the spectrum in both individualistic cultures. They just don't like being alone. They don't like the isolation and the alienation of individualism, and they thrive better in more collectivist cultures. So we're all very diverse. Even within a culture, we don't necessarily all fit in. So anyway, just some thoughts to kind of to sort of percolate, and do tell me your comments and feedback in the comment section, and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more videos from Holistic Happiness Academy. Thank you so much. Bye now.